All right, let's dive into a problem that I'm willing to bet keeps a lot of leaders up at night. How do you take all this amazing AI-powered research and actually turn it into real, measurable business results? Well, today we're going to break down a really clever method called the pilot in a box that's designed to do just that. But first, let's just acknowledge a super common and honestly really frustrating situation. Your team delivers a brilliant report. It's packed with what look like game-changing insights. Everyone gets excited, and then crickets. Nothing happens. It just sits there, gathering digital dust. So what gives? Where's the disconnect? Well, that disconnect has a name. The source material for this calls it the last mile problem. And it's exactly what it sounds like, that critical final stretch where all that great research just seems to hit a dead end. So what is it exactly? Think of it like this. The last mile is the huge gap between having a really smart idea on a slide and actually getting multiple teams to work together to make it happen in a way you can actually measure. The problem isn't the research quality. The failure happens in the execution and, crucially, in being able to prove it worked. And this right here is the absolute key takeaway. For most companies today, coming up with insights isn't the hard part anymore. The real bottleneck, the thing that's truly holding businesses back, is not a lack of ideas. It is a failure to execute. Okay, so if we know execution is the problem, the next step is to figure out why the current ways of doing things are failing so badly. And that leads to a diagnosis that's probably going to sound pretty familiar: trying to use one generic cookie-cutter solution for every single problem.
The research process started by asking a really fundamental question. When we talk about implementing insights, are we talking about one single job? Or is it actually a whole bunch of different jobs? To figure this out, they used the jobs to be done framework, interviewing all kinds of different stakeholders to figure out what they were really trying to get done.
And you know what? The answer came back loud and clear. A one-size-fits-all implementation plan is basically a recipe for disaster. It fails on execution because different teams need totally different things to actually do the work, and it fails on attribution because you just can't measure success with the same ruler for everyone. And this is where we get to the actual solution they came up with, the pilot in a box. Now, the really cool thing about this is that it's not just a process. It's a completely different way of thinking. It's a shift away from just delivering a report and toward delivering actual, tangible results. And this slide just nails that shift perfectly. The old way was selling better understanding. Here's a really smart report, hope it helps, good luck. The new way is all about selling measurable KPI movement. Let's be real, clients don't just want interesting facts, they want results they can confidently take to their CFO and defend. They need to show that their investment actually made a number go up. So instead of a generic plan, they built 3 totally tailored pilot-in-a-box options. If you're an e-commerce owner, the entire thing is focused on the numbers you live and die by: conversion rate, return on ad spend, stuff like that. For a B2B marketer, it's about accelerating the pipeline, moving marketing leads to sales leads faster and shortening that sales cycle. And for product manager, it's about getting new features out the door quicker and making sure people are actually using them. But a perfect plan on paper means absolutely nothing if you can't get people on board, right? This gets us to the human layer. To really work, the pilot had to be designed from the ground up to overcome that natural skepticism you find in big organizations by delivering undeniable proof. So one of the first things they heard, especially from e-commerce folks, was this: these people are drowning in data. They're drowning in high-level strategy decks. What they're screaming for is simple, concrete guidance. Just tell me what to do. Which buttons do I press? And the pilot answers that call directly. Instead of another 100-slide deck, it delivers weekly action plans. We're talking tactical, to-do list style instructions tied to specific levers they can pull right now. In their ad platforms, on their websites, with their pricing, no fluff. Now, let's talk about the CMO's headache. Their big challenge is almost always cross-functional. They get this great insight, but how do they make sure that the sales team, the content team, and the leadership team are all speaking the same language and actually using it? The answer here was to basically give them the tools to make it easy. The pilot doesn't just deliver an idea, it delivers package messaging frameworks, literal scripts for the sales team to use on calls, and a dead simple executive-ready story about the ROI. It's about removing the friction from alignment. And finally, over in the product department, you have a similar but distinct challenge. Product managers get these abstract reports about consumer trends, but their job is to write detailed specs for engineers to build concrete features. How do you possibly bridge that gap? Well, the solution was to build that translation process right into the pilot itself. This means structured workshops that are designed specifically to turn a fuzzy insight into a clear product brief. And it includes built-in checkpoints to force marketing, engineering, and product to stay aligned every step of the way.
Of course, none of this matters one bit if you can't prove it actually worked. So to escape what the source brilliantly calls attribution hell, the pilot uses a super rigorous standardized method. You use control groups, you run clean A/B tests, and you establish crystal clear performance baselines before you start. That way, when you're done, there's no arguing about what caused the results.
And the whole thing is locked in at 6 weeks. So why 6 weeks? It's the sweet spot. It's just long enough to see a real meaningful signal in the data, but it's short enough that it doesn't become a massive, scary project. It stays manageable, like a minimum viable product. So when you zoom out, what's the ultimate payoff here? Well, it's not about running one successful project and getting a high five. It's about creating a repeatable, predictable system that turns research into growth over and over again. What you get at the end is a system that is, and this is the most important part, CFO defensible. It takes research out of the nice-to-have bucket and puts it firmly in the decision-grade asset bucket. With a standard menu, a repeatable playbook, and a clear ROI template, it gives leadership the only answers they really care about. What changed, what number moved, and how much is that worth to us? And here's the magic number that makes the whole thing scalable. The goal for every pilot is to hit a minimum 3x return on investment. Once you can consistently prove that, this whole thing stops being a custom consulting project and starts becoming a productized system that reliably prints money. So that's the pilot in a box method in a nutshell. It's a really powerful framework for finally closing that maddening gap between a great idea and a real impact. And it leaves us with one last question to think about for our own companies. Is our real bottleneck a lack of insight? Or is it just our ability to execute on the great insights we already have?